At 75, Tom Waits, who was once the epitome of late-night American music, has faded into obscurity. He has been hiding on 40 acres in Sonoma County throughout the 1990s. For 8 months he did not hear from his own son. It was nearly ruined by the drinking, the affairs, and the bar fights. Except for legal battles, he hardly ever leaves his stronghold these days. Decades of abuse have destroyed his once famous voice. The singer turned into a broken person himself. Furthermore, his songs don't really reflect the reality of what truly broke him. On December 7, 1949, Tom Waits, weighing 7 pounds and 10 ounces, was born. Pomona, California had a chilly day. He was officially born at Park Avenue Hospital. Over time, however, Tom began to tell a story that was far more dramatic. He said that his parents had to pay $1.85 in the meter when he was born in the back of a yellow taxi, parked outside Murphy Hospital. The story was a great fit for the man he would become, whether or not it actually happened. It was already like a song when he was born. Both of his parents, Elma Fern Johnson and Jesse Frank Waits, were educators. Alma was of Norwegian descent in Oregon, and Jesse was a Scots-Irish-Spanish instructor from Texas. They were residing in Whittier on Pickering Avenue when Tom was born. They lived in a normal middle-class family with lots of books and a set religious schedule. However, nothing about Tom remained normal for very long. Everything in his life changed in 1959. When his parents divorced when he was only 10 years old, the scar it left behind never completely went away. Later on, Tom would refer to it as a trauma. He recalled his father as tough, aloof, and frequently intoxicated. Elma relocated to Chula Vista, a more tranquil suburb close to San Diego. After packing up Tom and his 2 sisters, Tom found himself suddenly torn between 2 realities. He visited his erratic father, who occasionally drove him to Tijuana across the border, but he also lived in his mother's strict, devout church-going household. That division between chaos and order served as the emotional foundation for all of his subsequent compositions. Tom started to undergo additional startling changes that same year. When he was only 10 years old, he took to smoking. He was the only hitchhiker. This was more than early adolescent rebellion. It was an outright denial of typical childhood. Later on, he characterized himself as a young man who sought out malevolent mischief. He was silent and tormented at school. Even if he was still trying to sound like Ray Charles or Bob Dylan and wasn't quite succeeding, by high school, his voice had already begun to carry the grit that would make him famous. He started working at Napoleon Pizza House in National City when he was 14 years old in 1965. Up until the age of 19, he worked there every week. He scribbled songs and watched everyone who came in late at night, according to the owners, Joe Sardo and Salo. It was more than a job to Tom. He could hear what was being said. He gathered tidbits of gossip, tales, disputes, humor, and heartaches from others in his immediate vicinity. Songs like Shore Leave and The Ghosts of Saturday Night would use some of those lines. He went to school without any sleep after working late, often until 4 in the morning. Tom wasn't simply huge though. As Salou once remarked, "I knew he was talented, but I didn't think he'd be that big." He was evolving into a powerful and odd entity. He also visited family in Marysville and Gridley during those years. Tom remembered one uncle's thick, gravelly, raspy voice. Later on, he acknowledged that it affected his singing. He began his musical career at a young age. He studied guitar and bugle at Jordan Elementary School. He learned to play the ukulele from his father. Even though they were only white Californian students, he formed a school band named The Systems, and they attempted to mimic Motown. He also listened to his dad's old CDs of Mexican folk music and Hank Williams. He listened to Roy Orbison, Ray Charles, and Wilson Pickett, and he covered his bedroom walls with Dylan's lyrics. His own speech started to be shaped by those extremely emotionally charged voices. Something that rocked him to his core happened when he was 15. He attended a live performance by Lightning Hopkins. The man passed a sign that read, "Keep out," as he made his way backstage. He had gold teeth and a ghostly voice. "Only entertainers are allowed in this room." Tom claimed that he realized immediately that he had to be one of them. He also witnessed James Brown's performance in San Diego in 1962. "It's like sticking a finger in a light socket," he remarked. He likened it to Christmas Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. These were awakenings rather than concerts. Tom left Chula Vista's Hilltop High School at the age of 18. School no longer piqued his interest. For years he had been living the life of an adult, working through the night, observing odd people, and hearing their suffering. Even against his fellow rebels, he referred to himself as a rebel. Tom traveled back in time to the gloomy streets of the 1950s, while everyone else chased flowers and peace signs. Rather than pursuing the hippie ideal, he studied the broken poetry of beat writers Kerouac, Ginsberg, and Burroughs. At the age of 20, he was hired as a doorman at San Diego's Heritage Coffee House in 1969. His entry into the music industry was made possible by this menial profession. When he first began playing there, he covered Dylan and classic country trucker tunes like Phantom 309. He then sang some of his early songs, including I Hope That I Don't Fall in Love with You and Old 55. Night after night, he helped run the door and practiced his speech in front of strangers. He began to draw the attention of bigger names. He served as an opening act for Friends, Jack Tempchin, Tim Buckley, Sonny Terry, and Brownie McGee. He taught in the Heritage Coffee House. Each night served as a lesson in stillness, timing, and using music to connect with others. Everything changed in 1971. Manager Herb Cohen noticed him at age 21, while he was still working at the Heritage and doing open mics at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. In 1972, Cohen signed Tom to Asylum Records, where he had previously collaborated with Frank Zappa. However, the majority of people are unaware that the previous year, Tom had already produced a few of songs for Zappa's bizarre label. Tom moved into the Tropicana Motel in West Hollywood after signing. Known for late-night rock stars and dashed hopes, it was a ruin of a place. He deliberately chose to live there. He said to the La Times, "You almost have to create situations in order to write about them. So I live in a constant state of self-imposed poverty." The following years were shaped by his choice to embrace the shady aspects of life. Closing Time, his debut album, was published in 1973. It sold hardly at all. Critics were unsure on how to interpret it. He had no money. However, he was spared by an unforeseen circumstance. For their 1974 album, On the Border, the Eagles recorded their own rendition of Old 55. Their rendition became very popular. Tom detested it. "They're as exciting as watching paint dry," he added, referring to them as sterile. However, he was able to make ends meet, thanks to the revenues from that one cover. Glenn Frey claimed years later that Tom didn't approve of our rendition. Then he received the check. "We've been tight ever since." Tom wasn't feigning to be a poor artist at this time. He was one. He took a lot of drinks. He smoked all the time. With a cigarette stuck to his mouth and a cloud of smoke surrounding him, he performed while intoxicated. Through the fog, he gave a performance. His antics at one London gig led to his expulsion from Ronnie Scott's club after just 3 nights. At the Tropicana, his room was a complete disaster. Thrift store suits, heaps of dishes, and days without shaving. He subsequently acknowledged that those years almost ruined him, but he went to AA and became clean. He published The Heart of Saturday Night in 1974, a musical map of American nightlife. It was more contemplative. Sales were still terrible, but critics were more attentive this time. His income was so meager that he was unable to maintain his trio. He had to go on his own tour. His tunes were described as tawdry affectations by one reviewer. Another stated his tunes were melancholic, and his lyrics were ambiguous. Even Tom later acknowledged that he was only trying, and stated the record was poorly structured. He might have given up music entirely if it weren't for the money from the Eagles cover. The worst, however, occurred in 1975. Tom consented to tour that year as Frank Zappa's opening act. That tour turned out to be a disaster. Zappa's admirers tossed trash at him every night. Fruit, vegetables, even trash. In order to keep him safe, Zappa had to take the stage. Even Tom's own parents joined in the mayhem and tossed lettuce at him during one performance. It was the same story in Paik, Manhattan, and Ontario. Flying food, insults, and jeers. It was embarrassing. Tom, however, continued. To cope, he drank more. Ironically, he was admired by the industry for having survived it. His reputation was formed on that terrible tour. He was more than a struggling songwriter now. Anything may be handled by him. Tom Waits entered Wally Heider's Studio 3 in Hollywood during the summer of 1976 and began recording a song that would forever alter the course of history. The sessions lasted from July 15 to July 29. Small Change became his first significant hit when it was released on September 21. For the first time, the album peaked at number 89 on the Billboard Top 100. Although it sold more than all of his previous records combined, it wasn't simply the sales that were different. It was the manner in which everyone at last stopped and paid attention. The music was produced by Bone Show and included well-known jazz musicians. Shelly Manne on drums, Jim Hart on bass, and Lou Tabachin on tenor sax. The soft folk music of his childhood had vanished. It was a theatrical performance. It was full of roughness, agony, and bruised poetry. His transition from barroom ballads to something darker was evident in songs like The Piano Has Been Drinking and Tom Traubert's Blues. After the album's popularity, he started his first legitimate touring band that same year. The Nocturnal Emissions was their name. Chip White played drums and vibraphone. Fitzgerald Jenkins played bass, and Frank Ficcari played tenor saxophone. Non-stop travel was the next step. For the next 3 years, the road would serve as his second home, and he was now a man in motion. A weird and chaotic incident occurred outside Duke's Tropicana coffee shop in West Hollywood on May 27, 1977. It was a predicament that Tom Waits and his companion, Chuck E. Weiss, were unable to escape. They had observed 3 ordinary sheriff's deputies disturbing patrons inside the eatery, and things quickly got out of hand as they raised their voices. The complaint claims that they challenged the deputies to a fight and said things like, "Hey man, I've got these dudes covered." Once outside, Weiss moved quickly close to his waistband, and the police followed, grabbing them. They pulled guns. Weiss and Waits were accused of fighting in public and placed in handcuffs. The deputies were wearing corduroy Sears clothes, but they were carrying heat. Waits later joked. The deputies said they were being arrested for being drunk and unruly, and for soliciting homosexuals. According to his boss, Herb Cohen, Dukes' patrons were so horrified that they lodged a complaint with the authorities, which prompted the opening of an official investigation. However, Waits continued as usual. The road served as both his battleground and his burden from the end of 1976 until the end of 1979. He did 30 gigs for small change, 73 shows for Foreign Affairs, and then 115 more for Blue Valentine throughout his continuous tour. He traveled throughout the United States, Japan, Germany, Finland, Belgium, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and even Australia on these tours. But he was falling apart with every performance. He took a lot of drinks. He occasionally passed out in the middle of a concert and awoke in hotel rooms that he had no memory of booking. His performances began fusing music with erratic performers. He once brought a stripper on stage during a song that made reference to pasties and a G-string. He opened himself out to a whole new audience by touring Japan by 1977, but the drinking and the constant travel were leaving lasting scars on his life. He acknowledged that the way of life was exciting at first. After that, it became the norm. Then it turned into a trap. Something changed within him in 1978. The album he recorded, Blue Valentine, had a more somber vibe than any of his previous work. It looked at tales of loneliness, criminality, and damaged lives. One track was very noticeable. Minneapolis's Christmas Card from a Hooker was more than just a tune. It was based on actual letters he received from admirers. It has heartbreak, court fines, deception, and holiday greetings from a woman to an old acquaintance. It was uncooked. Romeo is bleeding. And then there are West Side Story echoes and Latin noises. The album's title, A Desperate Man Trying to Find Forgiveness, was painfully defined by the last track, 29. It was hailed by critics as his first true masterpiece. Music was no longer the only thing. The silent cries of those society had forgotten were being recorded by him. He met the person who would transform his life later that year. Her name was Brennan, Kathleen. It wasn't until 1980 that they reconnected, having originally met at a New Year's Eve party in 1978. Brennan was then employed at Zoetrope Studios as a script analyzer for Francis Ford Coppola. Waits was recording music for the movie, One from the Heart, when she entered the studio. A spark was ignited at the meeting. They wasted no time. The date of their marriage was August 10, 1980. He was working on his album Heart Attack and Vine during that same summer, which was recorded from June 16 to July 15. For her, he even penned Jersey Girl. Brennan, however, was more than a mere muse. He changed his life because of her. Brennan saw more than just the artist in him. She saw the devastation too. Waits had been living up to the image he promoted on stage and drinking heavily since the start. Brennan forced him to face reality. He was slowly murdering himself. Behind closed doors, the man the public perceived as smart and wild was unraveling. Although it took some time, she assisted him in getting clean. Later on, he expressed that he felt like he had aged in the worst possible way. His producer, Bone Show, once claimed that Brennan saved his life by separating him from everyone. It had been more than 20 years since Waits touched booze, Brennan was the one who assisted him in getting out of the box he had found himself in. In 1983, a noteworthy event occurred. Brennan had begun playing music for him that he had never heard before. Tango, cabaret, Harry Parch, Captain Beefheart. Waits' voice abruptly changed from that of the previous Tom. He astonished everyone with his bizarre and chaotic album, Swordfish Trombones, which was published that year. The saxophones had vanished. The bassarima, accordion, banjo, squeeze drums, and even a harmonium entered. In August 1982, he recorded it at Hollywood's Sunset Sound. It was the first record he had produced alone. At first, critics were unsure of how to interpret it. It sounded like a Salvation Army band lost in a disjointed Hong Kong disco, according to John Peels. It only peaked at number 167 on the chart, but that didn't matter. It was named the year's second-best album by NME. Later, Spin called it the second greatest album ever recorded. In 1992, 9 years later, Tom Waits prevailed in a case against Frito-Lay for $2.6 million. In a Salsa Rio Doritos commercial, a person posing as him was so good at mimicking his voice that even die-hard admirers were duped. Waits was mad. His voice would never be sold for advertisements, he had always declared. The case established a precedent, demonstrating that using someone else's voice for commercial purposes was not only immoral, but also against the law. Something even more significant occurred in that same year. He permanently stopped drinking in 1992. He was 43. He told people he was attempting to get over all the hurt from his past. When he joined Alcoholics Anonymous, seeking serenity, he and his family relocated to Sonoma County. He recorded Bone Machine, one of his most impactful albums to date, in the same year. It was created in a storage area, with a cement floor, and a water heater rather than a posh studio. That was all he needed, he said, and it had a terrific echo. He made use of odd percussion, bones, crashing noises, and rhythms that resembled the dancing skeletons. The album was unpolished. Brennan co-wrote half of the tunes. For that vibe, Keith Richards even joined him. In 1993, it took home the Grammy for Best Alternative Album. Alternative to what? Waits inquired in jest, his voice already beginning to fade, to director Jim Jarmusch. Smoking, yelling, and growling had all caused harm. He even visited Frank Sinatra's throat physician in New York in 1987. The doctor told him to quit, or else he would lose everything. You mean rich and powerful? Waits laughed, but his voice was actually hurting. Although he denied it in public, he was unable to conceal the suffering indefinitely. He co-starred with Jack Nicholson in the movie Ironweed that same year. It didn't feel like acting to play a homeless man. That was the life of Waits. He had slept in apartments no one remembered, on benches, and indoors. He had to confront painful recollections from his past while playing the part. The audience sensed that it was genuine. Despite everything, he continued to change. He went through an odd period of experimentation, from 1985 until 1992. In 1985, he recorded 19 tracks for Rain Dogs, in a lower Manhattan basement. To Waits' dismay, Rod Stewart later recorded Downtown Train, making it a popular song. Being commercial was something he detested. Instead of using studio samples to create sound, he liked to bang on doors with boards. On one occasion, he informed his engineer that he liked a sound only after he had pursued, killed, skinned, and fried it. One of his best-received albums was The One. It presented the concept of rain dogs, animals that, like the characters in his lyrics, lose their scent in the rain. Tom Waits returned in 1999 with the album Mule Variations, following a 6-year hiatus. This was no ordinary comeback. In the US, the album immediately peaked at number 30 on the Billboard 200. However, Europe was the true surprise. It peaked at number 1 in Norway and went on to chart in 14 other countries worldwide. A man who had always seemed like an outcast was suddenly attracting attention from people all over the world. It was appreciated by critics. Listeners couldn't stop. The song Hold On was nominated for Best Male Rock Vocal Performance, while the album won him a Grammy for Best Contemporary Folk Album. It sold over 500,000 copies and achieved platinum status in Europe in 2010. The fact that Tom was on tour for the first time since 1987 added to its impact. During the summer and fall of 1999, that tour traveled throughout North America and Europe. At this point, his status changed. He was no longer merely a cult favorite. He was growing into something quite large. And without selling out, he accomplished it. The complete narrative of the bizarre incident involving a fan at a restaurant in 2000 is unknown. It is evident that Tom was more committed than ever to keeping his identity a secret during this period. He had defeated Frito-Lay 10 years prior, in 1990. Someone who mimicked his voice has been used in a Doritos radio commercial. More than 250 stations carried it. Tom was enraged since he had never agreed to make advertisements. It was dubbed the corn chip sermon by him. The jury concurred with him. They granted Frito $500,000 in damages, and the advertising agency an additional $1 million. For artists, that case changed everything. The vocalist received punitive damages for the first time for simply having their voice stolen. Tom became renowned for refusing to be taken advantage of. He demonstrated that his voice was sacred, and that the law had to respect that even without the typical fame machine supporting him. Then, in 2004, he released Real Gone, an odd and unvarnished record that was unlike anything he had ever done. There was no piano for the first time in his career. Rather, Tom started experimenting with rough-edged noises and beatboxing, some of which were inspired by his son Casey. Funk, Latin, African, and even Jamaican rock, steady rhythms, were all incorporated into the tunes. It was more than music. It was an insane test. Another cause made the song Day After Tomorrow stand out. It used passion and metaphor, not rage, to subtly criticize the Iraq War. Even though the song never raised its voice, it turned into a sort of protest. The CD was so daring that Heart magazine called it the best of 2004. The song Don't Go Into That Barn features historical quotations from a New York Times article about a slave cell in Kentucky that have been passed down through the centuries. It was more than music. Scars and I were telling stories. He went on the road once more for the Glitter and Doom Tour in 2008, 4 years later. His first significant tour since 1999, this one was everything from typical. Strict ticket regulations applied to more than 30 performances, spread throughout North America and Europe. Each person may only purchase 2 tickets. A photo ID matching the name on the ticket was required. You couldn't enter otherwise. No scalpers, no refunds. He was joined on stage by his sons, Sullivan on conga and clarinet, and Casey on drums. Experienced musicians like Patrick Warren, Omar Torres, Vincent Henry, and Seth Ford Young were with them. All the details were recorded for a 2009 live album. They performed at prestigious locations such as the Rand Rex in Paris, Phoenix Park in Dublin, and Fox Theatre in Atlanta. However, it had a negative impact behind the scenes. At the age of 58, Tom was starting to feel exhausted from performing night after night. Tom Waits shocked everyone once more with Bad Asthma in October 2011, when he was 61 years old. An uncommon feature of this record was the abundance of legendary guests. Keith Richards was a guitarist. Bass was handled by Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Legendary keyboards were brought by Augie Myers. Casey, his son, came back on drums. David Hidalgo and Mark Riot, 2 of Waits' long-standing friends, also returned. The album shot to number 6 on the Billboard 200 when it was released. In the US, this was his first album to ever reach the top 10. In fact, it was nominated for a Grammy for Best Alternative Music Album. The critics were taken aback. Tom was described as an American marvel that was simultaneously dark and humorous, rock-hard and meticulous, and intelligent and primitive. The trail he had blazed for himself was examined by indie rock performers, according to the New York Times. After more than 30 years away, he returned to Warner Music with this album. But it had been a difficult journey. When his daughter, Clesimone, was born in 1983, Tom was in the throes of anarchy. Living as a traveling artist, he was marketing Swordfish trombones. While Kathleen Brennan stayed at home and raised their child by herself, he frequently disappeared for weeks at a time. Their marriage almost failed due to the strain. Brennan made several demands of him, most of which he disregarded. Cold silences and lost moments filled their Sonoma County house. Later, Tom acknowledged that he had been preoccupied with his own damaged image, and less concerned with being a father, and more with being a crazy genius. Brennan had made multiple divorce threats by 1985. Then things became worse. His drinking had gotten out of hand by the late 1980s. There were lies, affairs, and bar fights. In 1990, Brennan finally had enough. After discovering evidence of the extramarital affairs, she gave him divorce papers and a decision: join Alcoholics Anonymous, get clean, or lose everything. At that time, Tom dubbed it the Abyss. He decided to go out. He was in AA in a matter of weeks. In Soma, he began weekly family therapy. In 1991, he made 2 mistakes, but never again. His sobriety saved his life as well as his marriage. His surroundings noticed the shift. He was no longer his own story's ghost. He was followed into music by his son, Casey, who was born in 1985 but with a great burden. Casey was a proficient drummer by the age of 21. He received Grammy-level accolades for his performance on Badass Me. However, Casey broke during the 2006 tour. He was crushed by living beneath his father's massive shadow. He was viewed by audiences as a younger Tom, which caused a great deal of anxiety. He didn't spoken to his father for 8 months in 2007. According to insiders, Casey struggled to decide whether to uphold his father's legacy or forge his own path. Only after Tom openly acknowledged Casey's talent and gave him room did the healing start. In an effort to distance himself from his father, Casey has now collaborated with independent bands and even adopted stage names. Sullivan, the youngest, was born in 1993 and chose a different route. He started producing music. After attending Berklee College of Music, he went to Los Angeles to work for Epitaph Records. He was not interested in the limelight. Instead of fame, he liked making noises behind the scenes. The family lives a very guarded existence in Sonoma County. There are no trespassing signs and private protection on their 40-acre property. In order to remain anonymous, Sullivan even uses aliases in his firm and switches even his phone number every few months. He has never discussed his father in public. By design, Tom Waits has been almost invisible since the early 1990s. He began declining interviews after relocating to Sonoma County. He has received less than a dozen grants since 1999. When his voice or likeness is exploited without his consent, he continues to defend cases. His private studio, Prairie Sun, is part of his 40-acre estate, which he purchased in 1992 for roughly $750. He uses many answering machines to filter his calls. Except for court appearances, he rarely travels. His mystique has only grown as a result of his extreme seclusion. In an attempt to see the man they have only heard about, some followers continue to set up camp outside his house. He made a surprise comeback in 2022 with a cover of the Italian anti-fascist anthem, Bella Ciao. He donated all of the proceeds to the Indivisible Project, slowed it down to a somber tempo, and published a video that featured anti-Trump protest footage. He hadn't released a new song in 2 years. In his memoirs, Tom's agent Paul Charles disclosed that he had resumed writing at about the same period. Even though he had recorded new songs, he was drawn back into the film industry. Everyone is still holding out hope. There has been a long gap since the last complete album was released in 2011. Fans were amazed at how sharp he remained on December 7, 2024, his 75th birthday. People paid tribute to him, describing him as timeless. He still has that gruff howl that was once compared to Louis Armstrong and Ethel Merman meeting in hell. According to a humorous piece, he would display a stunning falsetto if he ever cleaned his throat. He demonstrated that he still had screen presence in 2021, with his most recent performance in Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza. His portrayal of Rex Blau was exaggerated. Additionally, the movie was nominated for 3 Oscars, including Best Picture.